Okay, well, we have an incredible story that we're going to be hearing about in just a few minutes from Mark Rosenbaum, right there, and Benjamin Henwood and Robert Reynolds. I'm sorry, I know that. Okay, well, and everybody is always concerned about our service members, and we're saying that we need to honor their service, and they're going to tell you how they're trying to do it, and it has to do with veterans housing. As I won't go into it, I'll just let them start. Thank you. Welcome them in.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Ben Henwood. I'm a professor at the USC Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work, where I direct our Homelessness Research Center. I also co-direct the Homeless Policy Research Institute, which is really a collective of policymakers, people with lived expertise of homelessness, practitioners and researchers that come together to really try to advance equitable and culturally informed solutions to homelessness in Southern California. So if anyone's interested in that collective impact model, please let me know. If you're local, we'd love to join you, join us, even if you're not, that's totally fine too. But today I was just going to introduce this panel where we will be talking about veterans homelessness, or really the challenges that both these presenters today have been spending some time trying to address. And I think really for me, I'm here to set the stage in part because one of my roles is to help produce the estimates for LA's homeless population each year. These are numbers that go to HUD. That's a requirement to get funding for homeless services. And in 2023, that number topped 75,000 people who met the federal definition of homelessness here in LA. And that's an enormous number to think about. I think what's also important to note is that the rate of sort of acceleration of the number, just 10 years ago, the number was half that. So we've doubled our homeless population in the past 10 years. I think that this is fundamentally driven by a lack of affordable housing. I think we talked a lot about that today, and I also agree with the speakers earlier, Doctors Bishop and Howard, who talked about it's also driven just by institutional racist policies, I think, in large part, so that it would be really remiss of me not to acknowledge that. So I think, what I heard earlier is really thinking about how do we expand this idea of what housing that is affordable could look like. So we've heard about different models today. I think that's really important. What I just wanted to add to that conversation was that most of the conversation has focused on what I would call formal housing situations. So where we're talking about a housing unit with a leaseholder. What's important to know, and I think you'll hear a lot more about this tomorrow when Dr. Margot Kuchel talks about the state survey that was done looking at homelessness in the state of California, is that the majority of people who end up homeless are not coming from formal housing situations. They're coming from what we call informal housing, which might be renting a room in someone's house or a garage that's not permitted. These things would not qualify for any sort of subsidy or there's not a lease agreement. So it's really important to note that, I think, in part because that helps explain why in that same survey, 70% of people said if they had an extra $300 to $500 a month, they don't feel that they would have ended up homeless. And I think that's because that sort of funding can cover those informal housing options. That brings me a little bit to wanting to just share with you all an ongoing study that we have right now, where we are providing basic income to people who are meeting the federal definition of homelessness, the HUD definition. And this is a study that it's completely funded through private philanthropy, where we worked with a community partner, Miracle Messages, to recruit people in LA and the Bay Area who meet that definition of homelessness. And ostensibly, they're enrolling in a study to evaluate what we call the Miracle Friends program, but it's basically matching housed volunteers like yourselves who want to give back, aren't sure how. They get matched with an unhoused individual who's interested in just having someone to talk to address the social isolation that people feel all the time when they experience homelessness. So that's what the people were approached with. What we did not tell people, while they would be randomized to either get a phone buddy or not, what we didn't share was just over 100 people were also going to be randomized to receive $750 a month for 1 year. And so we now have our sample has received, everyone's received at least 6 monthly payments. And I can just report where we are today. This has not been peer reviewed or anything like that, but just looking at the numbers today, the people who received money, 30% of those individuals are no longer homeless. And that compares to our control group who did not receive the money, where only 15% were able to self-resolve. So another way of saying that is that providing just a small amount of money we see the rate of exiting homelessness is twice that of usual homeless services that are offered. So I think that's important to note, because when we're talking about just different policy solutions, it is creating affordable housing. It's also part of what makes something affordable is if you have the income. And so I think we do need to pay attention to the income side as well. What I'm just talking about is not going to address veterans' homelessness, back to the topic of the day, because for a lot of veterans, they're already receiving benefits. And so the question is, well, how do we address that? And I think we sort of already know the answer to that. There's been a lot of research that looks at implementing housing first programs using, or permanent supportive housing programs using a housing first approach. There's really robust evidence that shows this is an effective intervention. And what that means for veterans is really getting immediate access to housing that meets the needs and the preferences of veterans, and also providing adequate support services that are person-centered. And so while I think most people will agree on that definition, actually implementing that sort of program can be challenging. I think in terms of the VA itself, it clearly has recognized that this and attributed a 50% reduction in veterans' homelessness over the past decade to embracing this kind of approach. Okay, so that's at the national level. It's actually a bright spot in an otherwise just homeless services that really we've just seen the numbers grown. So veterans' homelessness overall is really sort of a positive, noteworthy accomplishment. However, in Los Angeles, we haven't seen the number go down much at all. In fact, over the past 5 years since I've been involved in the homeless count since 2017, the numbers have not budged. The estimates are, approximately 3,500 to 4,000 homeless vets, and that's despite a lot of political attention on this topic. And so I think that's really, I wanted to set the stage because, we do have effective interventions. We know how to address this. This is a population where actually resources have been allocated. So we should be able to do this, and yet we haven't in Los Angeles. And I think really what I wanted to do is tee that up so that maybe, Rob, I could pass it over to you to hear about some of the efforts to address this issue. So, Rob, is it?
My name's Rob Reynolds. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, served in Iraq. After I got out of the military, I came to California in 2012. I worked for CAL FIRE, the state fire department, for about 5 or 6 years, and then had my own struggles with PTSD and went to the West Los Angeles VA to get services. And through that experience, I ran into firsthand other veterans that were literally sleeping all around this property. And just to put this in perspective, there's nearly 400 acres of land in West LA. It's enormous, it's huge. And this property was donated after the Civil War in 1888 to be a soldier's home. It operated that way for nearly 80 years. They had upwards of 4,000 veterans living on that property. In the 1970s, Vietnam War wasn't that popular. The VA started evicting veterans from that land and started commercially leasing out the land to private school facilities, oil drilling, parking lot deals, everything unrelated to veterans. When you came to 2020, you only had 54 units of permanent housing on the property, dozens of empty buildings, and roughly 4,000 homeless veterans in Los Angeles. So roughly the same number that used to live on that property are now homeless in the city of LA today. And the government really didn't seem to want to do anything to address it. There was a previous lawsuit that Mark was involved in, and I know he'll talk more about that. And in 2015, there was an agreement the government made that they're going to build 1,200 units of housing, 770 of which should have been completed last year. None of that happened. And the veterans have suffered because of it. And it was in 2020, during COVID, when all the lockdowns went into place, that a lot of the programs on the property, the very few that were there, reduced all their occupancy to 50% for social distancing guidelines. And we were at a standstill to get veterans inside. And that's when around 50 veterans started camping around the West LA VA property with their flags, with tents on it. I worked with those veterans for 2 years, in and out, bringing donations in, trying to keep them alive and together and get them into programs. And the best way I could describe it throughout that time is it was almost like an accordion effect. When the lockdowns went into place, that was when the population would grow. When the lockdowns would cease, we'd start to get movement and people back inside. But it was really a case study to see what the problems were with the VA. And the VA was operating on banker's hours at the time. So you'd have homeless veterans showing up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon to ask for help to get shelter, and the VA was saying, oh no, come back tomorrow, we'll contact you another day. Then the VA police would then send them off of the property and they end up outside. And as you could imagine, when you finally get someone to that point where they go to ask for help, and then they're turned away, and then the police throw them off the property, it makes it that much harder to get them back inside the second time. And it was, for me, it was really eye-opening that our elected officials in the area, I feel like, did not engage that situation correctly. It was really hard to even get the attention of their staffers to come out and meet with the veterans, which was just astounding to me to think that you could have a quarter mile of tents with flags on it and veterans in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country, and you can't even get our elected officials to come out and do anything to help. And it wasn't until 2 people were killed that they came out, 2 Marine veterans. One was run over by a car and another was stabbed, unfortunately. And it was at that time that the secretary from the VA in DC came out, and a lot of the elected representatives locally came out, and a plan was put together to move veterans inside. And that's how the tiny home or tiny shed program was created, where you see all the little tiny sheds inside the VA. That's a step in the right direction, but I really see that as a knee-jerk reaction by the VA because they didn't complete the housing that was promised. And it's been really eye-opening to see that the only time we would really get movement is when we would shine a light on something, when someone would report on it. That was when the government started reacting and moving. But it was always this push and shove match that would go to the VA officials and identify what the problems are, and they would ignore us and ignore us, ignore us until we got it covered in the news. Then they would act. And that's just, they really need to be more proactive, because a lot of these issues are very easy to solve. There are a lot of them are common sense oriented. I could speak about one right now. We do have some new housing units that have started opening on the property, and all of this is a result of those veterans sleeping outside the VA and drawing a lot of attention to this. That's really what the catalyst for what got the ball rolling. And one issue we're facing right now with how these buildings are funded is there's income limit restrictions. So what that means is the most disabled veterans with missing limbs that would benefit the most from living by the VA hospital are being told that they don't qualify for housing. Anywhere else in the VA system, the more disabled you are, the more benefits you get, except when it comes to housing. And that has to do with HUD's policy. So HUD has a policy where they're counting veterans' disability compensation as income, and that's one of the things that addressing in the lawsuit. And it's been also eye-opening to see how HUD does not want to change that policy, how much they've fought to change that policy to stop counting veterans' disability compensation as income, even though the IRS doesn't count it as income. So you got 2 branches of government arguing against themselves. And in the meantime, our veterans are suffering. I'm thankful to see where we are today. There's 233 apartments open on the property in the last couple of years, and a lot of veterans that were out on San Vicente Boulevard on the Veterans Row have moved in, and it's been a blessing to see that, but there's still a long way to go and a lot of issues that we need to get worked out, and that's something that we're addressing in court. And I would like to introduce Mark Rosenbaum. He's one of the lead attorneys on the case. He was involved in the last lawsuit, and if anyone has any questions afterward, definitely be happy to answer them.
Hi, I'm Mark Rosenbaum. I'm with Public Counsel. It's really an honor to be here and to be among Rob and Ben today. Ben is an expert in the case, and Rob is the catalyst in this case. And Rob is being way too modest. The only reason that those veterans who were on San Vicente, and one thing, Rob, we should emphasize, these are veterans. These are veterans of Iraq. These are veterans of Afghanistan. These are veterans who suffer severe mental illness, PTSD, brain trauma, sexual violence, addiction. These are, as Rob indicated, the most seriously disabled veterans that anyone can imagine who served the nation. When I was invited to talk with you all today, one of the things that Jane emphasized was a focus on remedy, which is smart, wise, because we know how to end homelessness, right? Everyone in the room knows how to end homelessness. Everyone in the room knows how to prevent homelessness. Everyone in the nation knows how to end and prevent homelessness. We talk about permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, educational opportunity, health care, treatment of mental illness, support for families, guaranteed income, and as you said, Ben, Tyrone and Joe and others have talked about racism, sexism, homophobia, poverty. No veteran, no one I know had a life dream about being unhoused. I want to talk about some strategies to augment what all of you were doing to address these terrible and unnecessary tragedies. What happens when the political processes fails? Because there's not a political figure who's not aware of it. There have been more press conferences on these 388 acres than there are housing units. What I want to suggest to you is that where the political processes have failed as abysmally as they should, there is no reason for a gathering in 2024 to address this issue. And what I want to suggest is that in supporting your work, in supporting grassroots movements, that we should take resort to the courts, and I'm going to talk about our case, for justice, for law. And I want to suggest that we think about changing the narrative so that those who are unhoused, those who work tirelessly like Rob does on this, don't have to implore anybody. This is a basic right. And I don't mean just a basic human right. It is a basic right under our laws. And it is time, I think, to be pressing that in courtrooms with appropriate attention to what is taking place. Now, I'm going to get to the veterans case in just a moment, but it would be remiss not to talk about what is about to happen in the Supreme Court with the Grants Pass case, which is a horror show. We know that the Supreme Court is poised to permit, in fact, to promote the criminalization of poverty. The origins of that case actually are here in Los Angeles. I argued in 2004 a case called Jones versus the City of Los Angeles, which is the origin case for this. And the theory in the Jones case, we represented individuals who were unhoused. One of the individuals I represented slept outside a shelter where there was not room for him. At the time, what you said, Ben, is so true. Those were the good old days. In those days, there were tens of thousands more unhoused persons than there were shelters. Now that number has increased. Los Angeles had a law, it still has a law, that criminalizes sleeping, sitting, resting on sidewalks, and we brought litigation to challenge it. And the position of the city at the time was that they had a right to arrest individuals for it. In fact, during that period of time, 1 out of every 6 arrests in Los Angeles was in Skid Row, was of an unhoused individual, were for misdemeanors that could have been charged as infractions. They were bullshit infractions, bullshit misdemeanors, like jaywalking, like loitering, like getting warrants and not showing up, and then orders or show cause, which of course resulted in individuals getting criminal records, which of course resulted in the fact they couldn't get jobs after that point. I represented another individual who, again, slept near a shelter because there was no other place. He hoped to get in there. He was arrested. He was kept in jail for 2 days. By the time he got out, a job that he had at a meatpacking plant 2 or 3 bus rides away was gone. He had lost his job because he hadn't shown up, and that was the story. We won that case, which is the reason that there are individuals sleeping on sidewalks within a block of where we're sitting right now, and all throughout the city. But and we cut a settlement that said that the order would devolve of its own power when the city built a certain amount of permanent supportive housing. The city never built it, and that's why that order is still in effect, and that's what is being challenged. Now, I just want to put a pin in that for a moment, because I'm going to come back to that case, particularly with the understandable prediction that the Supreme Court is going to say that that is not cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, give me a break. When you arrest somebody for sleeping, when you arrest someone for sitting where there's no place else to go, that is cruel and unusual punishment by anyone's basic definition. That is criminalizing poverty. That is saying to that individual, because for the sets of reasons that we all know exist, you are on the street and you have no place to go, you are a criminal. That's cruel and unusual punishment. It serves no legitimate criminal justice basis. That was the reason for the victory, and that is what is now being challenged, and that is which, unfortunately, the City of Los Angeles, the state of California, has come down on the wrong side. Which brings me to the Powers case, the veterans case. Veterans case is on behalf of unhoused veterans, as Ben and Rob have said. 4,000 in Los Angeles. That number is growing. Of those 4,000, that means that is 10% of the national total of unhoused veterans in the nation. 32% of that population is black. In an overall population where 9% is black. Veterans are more likely to be unhoused than any other group in the population itself. Who are the veterans that we represent? Well, Rob helped bring forward a lot of them. As I said a moment ago, these are veterans who suffer from PTSD. These are veterans who suffer from severe mental illness. These are veterans who suffer in brain trauma. One of the veterans that Rob brought forward to us was an individual who went to Baghdad and was loading mortars. He was just outside Baghdad. He was loading mortars, 50-pound mortars that he lifted. If you look at him now, he can't stand up. He's bent over. He couldn't even sleep on the ground because he wasn't able to put himself in a situation. The tents that Rob was talking about, those are tents where they were being occupied not just by the individual, but by rats, by vermin. One individual woke up and found rats running all over him. And we ought to be clear, the key word for me that Rob used was, those are donations. The government would not supply even tents, fought individuals from having tents, and they had to be donated. And the sheds that Rob was talking about, should go out to San Vicente in Wilshire. Those sheds are for donkeys. Sheds are for livestock. They're not for human beings. Those sheds the government refused to pay for. Those also had to come from donations. So we brought a case, and I want to go back to what Rob said a moment ago. It's the second case we brought. We brought a case when I was at the ACLU in 2011 on behalf of homeless veterans. It settled in 2015 after we had received successful rulings from the federal judge who was then assigned to the case. The government said, well, look, we will, in fact, build the housing that Rob talked about, 1,200 units. 1,200 units is really the good old days in terms of Los Angeles. They said that they would bring to 1,200 units, 770 by 2021. And as Rob said, they didn't, in 2021, the Office of the Inspector General did an audit and found that there wasn't a single new unit of housing that had been built. It had not a priority. Nothing was done. How much did the government put into that process financially? Zero. The federal government's position, the VA position, was that they did not have the authority to put any money into housing on that 388-acre land that, as Bob said, was donated in 1888 to be a soldier's home. And the government's response, and it continues to be their response, is that they do not have the authority to spend money on that. I was just in court this morning. That's why I wasn't here earlier today. The government this morning told us in January, the second suit, we asked for emails from VA officials. We asked for emails. Didn't hear anything in February, didn't hear anything in March. 2 days ago, I got an email saying the government has discovered 250 million emails that had never been turned over to us. The litigation was filed in November of 2023. Government there's 250 million emails that have not been turned over. We said to them today, well, are you going to turn them over? They said it's too expensive to process it. We don't have the money to process it. They don't have money for housing. They don't have money to process it. When I took depositions of VA officials, I said, why don't you build it? We don't have any money. We don't have the money. What is the budget of the VA? I said to the judge today, budget in 2025 for the VA is $359 billion. The government said we don't have any money, so that even the permanent supportive housing, the little that's on that campus, which Rob, and again, you underestimate it. Rob brought CNN out there. Rob brought the New York Times out there, and that's the only reason they actually moved on it. But the government, I said to the government, the head of the VA in deposition, have you gone to Congress? No. Have you asked Congress for money? No. Do you intend to ask Congress for money? No. So the authority is there. I said to the government, if the judge rules that it is illegal not to provide housing for these individuals, will the government comply? And then a long pause, said, we don't have any answer to that yet. Then I said, well, is there a problem? What's the problem with this? And one of the problems was, well, if we do it in Los Angeles, this is literally what was said. If we do it in Los Angeles, we're going to have to do it everywhere in the country. God forbid. What's the theory here? And this goes to my point about our job, in my view, in making clear this is a right. What's the theory here? The veterans whom Rob is talking about, who suffer severe mental illness, who suffer physical disabilities. I'm another veteran whom I've represented in the past, a gentleman who fell out of a helicopter in the Philippines during the Vietnam War. One of the things he said to me is they're waiting for all of Vietnam vets to die. But he fell on his head. He was arrested and given charged with an infraction for going through the garbage on the VA campus, and he was charged with stealing government property. Another vet whom I've represented in the past said to me, well, one of them just said to me the other day, if I take the stand, I don't want to talk about Iraq. I don't want to go through that. I can't think about that. Another vet who had been in Iraq said to me, he saw when he was in Baghdad, individuals near the desert, military, taking bottles, it was so hot, taking bottles, and kids, Iraqi kids came and asked for water. And they took these bottles, and they threw them into the desert, and the kids ran out, and there were landmines. and this is one of the gentlemen who came back and who was unhoused. What's the theory here? What's the theory here? The theory is perfectly common sense. In order for the veterans to get the health care benefits to which they are entitled, that's not a gift. You know, part of what Rob said was that their disability payments, the government is treating as income, even though IRS doesn't. Government is treating that as income and then saying you make too much income to live in those units. That's what was meant about, it's called the AMI. That's what that is what is meant when it is said that the more disabled you are, the less likely you're to be on the land. But the reality of the veterans whom we are so privileged to represent in this situation is that they cannot access their health care. They cannot access their health care. They cannot access their psychiatric, mental health treatment because they're on the street, because they're unhoused. Well, of course they can't. And where are they unhoused? They're unhoused in Skid Row. They're unhoused in all parts of the community. And the government has, because of this land, this deed, centralized the main healthcare facilities on these grounds. And what the government has said is, you know, if you get here, you can get the facilities. Well, you might as well put them on the moon in terms of their capacity to get it. And so just like if the government said to someone in a wheelchair, if you want to come into our healthcare facilities, you can do so, but we're not going to give you a ramp, by letting individuals be on the streets, they are saying to those individuals, you don't have access to the health care. And that's been our theory, and a federal judge, a great federal judge, Judge David Carter, said to us when the government sought to dismiss this case. Government filed papers to dismiss this case, saying that their own veterans did not have rights to permanent supportive housing, did not have rights, and sought to toss the lawsuit out. In fact, what the VA said was, not only did they not have the rights, but they didn't have the right to sue in federal court. They said that Congress had prohibited them from suing in court, and the judge said, if I can summarize in a word, that's nonsense. That's complete nonsense. And we won that, and we'll win the case. But the argument, what I'm suggesting to you, is that the notion here is that permanent support, it's not a gift, it's not a benefit, it's a basic right in order to access these healthcare services in the first place. And two other small points I want to make about this. The government also has vouchers, that they HUD-FAST vouchers that can be utilized to get rental housing. But that's a mind screw also, because the vouchers that they give more in LA than anywhere else, but they have no effect. This community leads the nation in unused vouchers. Only 47% of the vouchers that are handed out aren't utilized. Well, why not? For one thing, it takes 8 months to put somebody into housing. That's generous. But more significantly than even that, the vouchers are worthless. Try to get a room in Brentwood if you're a veteran with mental illness on the rates of it. Try to get a room in Westwood. Try to get a room anywhere near what those facilities are. So it is a PR campaign, but it is a worthless campaign in terms of addressing it. And then the very last point I want to make are these leases that both Ben and Rob. As Judge Carter said, the VA cares more about Brentwood School, which is one of the toniest private schools on the planet, which is on the vet's land. And the Office of Inspector General has said that is an illegal lease under congressional law, and the response of the VA, they spent $100,000?
Brentwood School.
$100,000 to lobby Congress to change the law so that they could stay there. UCLA's baseball diamond, Jackie Robinson Stadium, is on veterans' land. When we brought a previous lawsuit on that, UCLA, after the judge ruled that the lease was illegal, UCLA filed a brief which said, An unintended consequence of this lawsuit is going to make the nation's #1 college baseball team homeless. That was literally language that they utilized there. And in papers that I saw just a few days ago filed by UCLA, UCLA said that its baseball program is helping veterans because they will give, for the first 50 veterans who go to a UCLA baseball game, and you can imagine how high on the list of priorities going to a UCLA baseball game is for these veterans, they will give a free hot dog and Coke to those individuals, and they will permit limited batting practice, which so far no veteran has done. And that's what UCLA is doing about this. Now, let me summarize this way. These are tragic stories. These are stories that don't belong in 2024. They don't belong on any civilized nation in the 21st century. In the 20th century, veterans were doing better in 1888 than they are doing in 2024. But what I'm saying is we need to use these theories, and we need to use it as part of mobilizing the narratives about what basic rights are. And with respect to the first thing I said, the grants pass thing, state, if the federal courts aren't going to give it to us, then damn it, let's go into the state courts. Let's force these issues into the state courts and make them address these issues, just as we did with reproductive rights, just as we did with education, where there are courts that actually understand and care about what justice means. And with respect to the Powers case, what I'm saying is we're going to win this case. But it is so important that that our government officials hear about this. I mean, to be honest with you, this is the Biden administration that is fighting us in this case. And it's so important that they hear about it. And it's so important that Congress hears that the VA's defense is we don't have the authority. But once we win this case, then we need to take it more. Because if you think about the county of Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, where individuals come for benefits, it's the same thing. If they're unhoused, they can't get their Social Security benefits. They can't get their public assistance benefits. They can't even get the right to vote or go to the DMV. And the theory that this is just the basis in terms of an individual whose disability was obtained in service of this nation. Now it's time for the nation to serve these individuals. We say that this is the home of the brave, but in this nation, the brave have no home. And I think it's time that we make that statement clear, that we assert that these individuals' right, that we represent heroes recognize heroes like Rob Reynolds and the individuals are there, and that we just put an end to this once and for all. Okay, thank you. We can take any questions anybody has. Unless we've used up time, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a question in the back.
Yeah.
Okay. So a bunch of us are involved in politics in this district, right? We know the congressperson, the state senator, the state assembly person, the city council person, the supervisor for this district. When you say it's important for the political leadership to hear about this, and obviously these stories are outrageous, we think of the politics of that area, of the leaders in that area, being relatively progressive. Who is it? Who are we targeting here? What up the chain that is authorizing this kind of stuff, and what's the response of the other folks in the area that are supposed to represent these constituents?
So just recently, last year, there was the congressional redistricting. Now Congressman Brad Sherman is in charge of the West LA VA. Previous to that, it was Congressman Ted Lieu. So Congressman Ted Lieu, I'm extremely disappointed with him. The entire time that veterans are on encampment, veterans are sleeping outside, he couldn't even send a staffer there. And it goes even further than this. It's very easy for our elected members of Congress to ignore a homeless veteran than it is for them to talk negatively about Brentwood School, UCLA, oil drilling on the property. This is like the big stuck point. None of them want to, I've met with Ted Lieu, anytime anything is brought up about illegal leases on that property, a wall goes up, they don't even want to have the discussion. And even furthermore, what Mark is talking about in the previous lawsuit when UCLA's baseball stadium was ruled illegal. One of their spokespersons also went in the LA Times and said, we're going to do everything possible to remain on this property. When Congressman Ted Lieu got elected into the House of Representatives, one of his first orders of business was to pass the West Los Angeles Leasing Act. And in that legislation, he touted to veterans, this legislation is going to ensure that all leases on the property principally benefit veterans and their families. But you know what was included in that? A 10-year lease for UCLA baseball stadium. So he doesn't want to answer that, and it's decisions like that from our elected officials that I believe why veterans are homeless in Los Angeles, because they're more concerned with appeasing these special interest groups on the land than they are answering to the needs of the homeless veterans. And again, it all goes back to, you have this land, this 400 acres of land in West LA. When it was donated in 1888, Brentwood didn't exist, Bel Air, Westwood, none of these affluent communities were there. Veterans were there. Now you have community members that are lobbying Congress to change laws to keep veterans off the land. They always want other businesses. And what Mark was talking about earlier with Brentwood School, they spent way more than this, but just recently they spent $100,000 lobbying Congressman Bost and Congresswoman Dreamer of Oregon. And within that, what they lobbied for was to change some wording in the West Los Angeles Leasing Act to essentially take the teeth away from the Inspector General, and so that way they could stay on the property. We were able to catch that early and get it stopped, but it just goes to show that our own government, the VA, won't go to Congress to get authority to build housing, but Brentwood School can go to Congress to get authority to stay on the property illegally. It's just been really, it's just mind-blowing that this goes on. And even furthermore, in 2021, and this is part of the lawsuit, is with Brentwood or UCLA, they amended their lease and they built another baseball field, another practice field. And one of the employees who was fired for this gave us a recording of a meeting. And in that meeting, the VA director, he was in there and he was saying, okay, we're going to build another ball field. Veterans are going to be up in arms when they find out about this. We can't let them find out about this.
He actually said this, right? It was on
literally said this. This is verbatim. We cannot let veterans find out that this is going to be built. We found out about that. We got the video. We sent it to the Federal Advisory Board that oversees the property. They submitted a recommendation to Secretary McDonough saying that this disproportionately favors UCLA. They should not build a stadium. Secretary McDonough ignored that and allowed UCLA to build a stadium, and UCLA built that stadium while all the veterans were sleeping on the street right outside the VA. So all these veterans watched another baseball stadium get built while they're stuck sleeping out on the street and there's no housing. So your question with our politicians, they know this, they need to engage this. There's a lot of things that can be fixed. We need help with the income limit restrictions with HUD to stop counting veterans' disability compensation as income. The VA needs to go to Congress and get the authority to build housing and stop coming up with every argument of why they can't help veterans, but then under the same breath coming up with every argument why they can illegally lease land. So to me, that is the big problem that's going on in West LA.
So we have two other questions here.
So my question is this. With your lawsuit that you have now, is there any way to also include a caveat there where those that are unhoused would be able to have some type of mailing system so they can start the process of getting their VA benefits? Because I know what, excuse my French, what hell it is for vets to get their for them to get their benefits. Is there any way for you guys to do anything like that with that lawsuit?
We have talked about there's so few catch-22s in life, really. This is one of them. You're exactly right. They can't get the benefits in the first place. They can't get access to them. You know, if I can just digress for just a half a second on it, something like 30% of all veterans who get the vouchers after waiting 8 months get thrown off because they haven't done the paperwork on it, which they don't have the support in order to do in the first place. And then, again, I took a deposition 2 weeks ago. The argument from the VA official was, well, they didn't care enough to do that. These are unhoused veterans, or they're veterans in the worst situations who see no social workers. You know, it's not permanent housing, it's permanent supportive housing. And we're putting a big emphasis on the case of supportive in terms of addressing it, and that'll help focus the issues that you're talking about. I mean, I had a VA official say to me one time, you know, Mark, where are these veterans? Where are these so-called unhoused veterans? And that's part of it, and these are the individuals who, just as you say, aren't getting the benefits, they're not getting the full benefits. I mean, that's what the case is all about, so we'll get them on that too.
So, and when I mention that, what I'm stating is like how for people that are receiving public aid,
Yeah,
the unhoused are able to receive their mail there in the office. That's, in other words, is it something that you guys can do that replicates that?
we need something, yeah, you're right, and you're exactly right, and I appreciate you telling me about that, and we'll work on that. It reminded me of another thing. Talk about when they said, Rob, why don't you go to the Welcome Center there in terms of buildings that are accessible?
Yeah, so there's a welcome center on the property. All the homeless programs are located on the north side of the property, and in order for veterans to get enrolled into those programs, they have to go to, so when you have like all of these programs on the north side, that's where everybody shows up to. It becomes a hub. And in order for them to get enrolled in those programs, they have to go almost a half mile away, and they're on foot, and they're
If they can
disabled,
walk.
and they have bags with them, so it's very challenging to get people into the program.
And the hours?
It's since increased, but I think they're open until 5 now, which is not. Before it was 2 o'clock, that was the cutoff to be able to get enrolled.
So we have a question here, and then we have a question here, and if we have time, we have another question. So we have three more questions.
First of all, thank you, Rob, for the work that you're doing right there at the VA. I know it's really important. It's heartbreaking to see this. I'm a veteran myself, and I see how our brothers and sisters are being treated and mistreated at every possible way, including those that are really suffering because of the wounds that they have carried over the years. What can we do to help you?
That's great. I really appreciate you asking that question. Anything that can be done to get some of these issues addressed, in my opinion, in Congress, the VA having the authority to build housing, HUD to stop counting veterans' disability compensation as income. Again, this is compensation that someone is getting for the loss of something. They lost a leg. And because they lost a leg and they received this very small amount of money, they're being told they can't get into housing next to the VA hospital when they're the ones that would benefit the most from being next to the VA hospital. So there's, and also, the VA following the law. I mean, what's this say about our government if the VA continues to break the law? They continue to enter into illegal land use agreements. I mean, in the face of all the veterans, everyone's seeing this. It's like, what's the point of our laws if our own government won't even follow them? And this has been an issue for decades. So any type of advocacy, I mean, I'd be happy to share my contact information. Any type of advocacy on a lot of these issues would be very helpful.
So my question is about the media. All of us listening to you, you can just hear gas coming from the audience. How much coverage? You talked about being disappointed in Ted Lieu.
Yes.
How many of the readers of the Los Angeles Times know what's going on?
The Los Angeles Times has covered it, but it's just like with every media, they only cover what they're going to cover in their parts, which is frustrating. I'm thankful for, I'm definitely thankful for the journalists that have put a light on this, but there's always a need for more because, again, a lot of these issues are very common sense oriented. These are solutions that can be put in place. These are things that can be done to truly help people, and we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. This already happened in the past. This soldiers' home operated for nearly 80 years and 4,000 veterans lived on it. Again, roughly the same number that are homeless in Los Angeles today. So that's all the ask is to try to get the right thing done and return this property to what it used to be and get our veterans off the street.
Not enough, and Washington Post hasn't covered this, the New York Times hasn't covered this. Those are clear targets that we could use some help in terms of, addressing these sorts of issues. And the VA, they don't have money for housing. They've got support of Brentwood, but they certainly have money for a PR campaign. And I meant what I said. You count up the number of press conferences and the number of officials who have appeared at way more than that, and they're putting out lies in terms of what they're doing with permanent supportive housing. They're putting out lies about what UCLA and Brentwood does, and they've got a machine that puts it out, and it often ends up in stories completely false in terms, I mean, Rob knows. Even the story, they took credit for bringing those veterans in, and they had nothing to do with it. They took credit for those sheds that no human being, by the way, those sheds, they don't have toilets. If you have to go to the bathroom, including individuals with bags, in the middle of the night, you go outside in order to do it. There's no cooking facilities in there. It is literally a shed and not a housing unit. And they're taking credit in terms of saying that there's housing units on it. And so we not only have to get the story out, but we have to combat the lies that our government is putting forward with respect to that. I mean, imagine saying today in court, we don't have enough money, $369 billion budget. The judge said, this is the United States government, we don't have enough money to give you those emails. We all know why they don't want us to see what those emails are. So we need help on that also.
And just,
Professor Rosenbaum, and I call you professor because you once were my professor 25 years ago.
Do you remember what grade I gave you?
It was an A+, I'm sure.
Because, pending your question, I can still lower that grade.
All right. My question is about the theory of the case, and you said changing the narrative about rights. And I'm imagining I'm a city council person in the city of Pomona, we have a social security office, let's say. Like if they have land and we have homeless people in Pomona who can't access social security benefits because of all the reasons why the veterans can't access their benefits. Are you thinking in those terms, like there are ways to expand in that way, or people who can't access CalFresh benefits?
Totally.
And there's Caltrans land in my city that ought to have housing on it so that they can, so that's kind of what you're talking about.
Totally.
Okay.
Totally.
All right. Well,
I'll raise your grade.
all right, great, perfect. Then yeah, we should do that.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. I'm a veteran too, and the stories you're telling are not really new. I mean, they've been around for years, really. And I don't think any of this is happening by accident. Maybe some of it's incompetence, but the reason Ted Lieu and the papers don't cover it, it has to be that powerful forces on the West Side don't want good things to happen to those veterans. They want them to suffer. They want them to disappear. Is that not right?
When Rob was out there, the Brentwood Homeowners Association approached the VA and said, you've got to do something about this. Not bring them in, but get them away. And then the Brentwood Association, when it was said that this land could be utilized for purposes of housing, the Brentwood said, that's really not the solution. Did they have a solution? No, they didn't have a solution. But that's precisely what was the very aggressive lobbying to which they responded. And there were police out there. There were police that were called out there by the Brentwood folks, not to help the individuals, but to get them off that land.
Yeah, and some of the police were veterans, and when they came out, because there's a lot of misinformation going around that they weren't veterans for a while, they were all criminals, vagrants, drug addicts, you name it. And the police would come out, and some of them were veterans. And one of them gave me good advice early on, and he said, he's like, look at, people are saying a lot of stuff right now. He's like, I see what you're doing out here. I see that these are all veterans. And he said, you need to document this every single day, who's here, what they're waiting for. And that's what I did for a year and a half, and just sent that to the VA to show them. But just, to your point of what you were saying, I've read letters from World War II veterans that were talking specifically about this property in West LA. Please don't let this land get stolen. They saw something going on back then. Then it was passed on to the Vietnam veterans. Now it's being passed on to the next generation of veterans. So I believe that it all has to do with.
And there were indictments. Talk about.
Oh, that's right. As recently as 2018, VA contract officer and parking lot operator Ralph Tillman and Richard Scott were indicted by the FBI and went to prison for defrauding $13 million out of a parking lot. They had a parking lot scheme where they were renting it out and pocketing the money.
And the position of the government in our case is that the deed is worthless, that even though the deed was, you can read the deed, was specifically for the purpose of creating the soldiers' home that Rob described, the legal position of the United States government is that they are not bound by that deed. The judge said to them, Judge Carter said to them, very first day in the hearing, do you believe that you have a fiduciary duty in terms of that deed? They didn't answer. He said, no, I want an answer. And they said, no, we don't have a fiduciary duty. And that is the position that they're taking, even though, west of the Mississippi, is there a landmass that is more valuable than those 388 acres? They said, there's not housing for these individuals. The individual whom I deposed a couple weeks ago, who's head of the VA there, he's actually got a house that was built by the government on the land, but they can't do that for the veterans themselves. And one of the things Rob told me is that the veterans had better housing in Iraq and Afghanistan than they do in West Los Angeles.
Well, and it's just, there are.
Yeah, I was going to just add.
There are females there. The resources for female veterans, there's a lot less, but right now there are females living in the tiny.
When the first case, I represented a woman who came from a military family. She had been in Germany, and she was raped repeatedly by U.S. military there. When she came back here and sought relief, they had no housing for her, so they put her in a dormitory setting where she was the only woman and everybody else was a man. That has improved some, but in terms of, we'll talk about Jessica.
We have it's one of the plaintiffs in the case, female veteran, single parent with a teenage daughter who's having trouble getting into housing right now. There's really no facilities on the property for single mothers. So that's been a challenge, living out of their car at the moment. Sure. Yeah.
So, well, all of this sounds unconscionable. I was wondering, Mark, if you... Well, all of this sounds unconscionable. I was wondering if you could outline for us any additional federal court appellate options at this point. And then if you might explain to us how it might be that individuals, veterans, with federal benefits would have standing in a state court system.
Are there other cases addressing this issue? No. There was recently a case that was done by the Yale Legal Clinic for Military, great case, that talked about discrimination against black military. Government took the same position that couldn't be in federal court. I learned last week the federal court disagreed with them. But in terms of these issues, no, there are not other cases out there. In terms of state court matters, state court for these issues, if it's on behalf of veterans and it's under federal law, it has to be in federal court. Otherwise, though, for like the individuals that like the grants pass, we should go to state court tomorrow on those issues. I don't believe that the lawsuit should be the engine, but the lawsuit should support all of your work and all the work of the other groups that Jane has brought together for this, and we're going to win those cases.
Just wrap up on fine. Thank you. This case is it's really important that we get the housing built for our veterans on this land and end veteran homelessness in Los Angeles. We have the property there, we have the buildings there, there's the infrastructure there. This is totally doable. And, I will say that, I'm thankful for my VA healthcare benefits. I do get good medical health care. My big issue is how homeless veterans are treated and those that are severely disabled and can't advocate for themselves. With that, we know that the military is at an all-time low for recruitment, and it can't help with this kind of issue going on. Why would someone want to join the military and go to war and come home with some type of disability and risk ending up out on the street homeless? Thousands of our veterans are homeless, and it's unacceptable, and it needs to change, and I believe it will change, and I just appreciate everyone's time here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
Okay, but I just want to, okay.
was incredibly moving. Thank you so much.